I think it's just our drive to and the passion behind it and wanting to get this information out and to get other, moms fired up about these things and educated so they know how it's affecting them and their kids.
We're good? Y'all ready? You good? Ready? Good. All right, ready? All right. What's good, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of Conversation Piece, and I want to thank you for being here for the second episode in our emergency conversation series, where we talk with folks from the community about some extremely pressing, incredibly important issues here in Indianapolis, the state of Indiana, and beyond. My name is Patrick Armstrong. I am your host, and I'm really excited because my guests today are two Indiana moms who are passionate about making our state more inclusive, building a more engaged Hoosier electorate, and helping families to take meaningful action in their own communities. They do this work together as Moms for Indiana, educating and empowering Hoosier moms and caregivers and anyone else who follows them, like me, on the daily via social media, doing the work of breaking down the constant flow of information and making it accessible as well as resonant. And there is a lot of information. So without further ado, we're going to get right into it. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome Ellen Fitzgerald and Chelsea McDonough to the show. Ladies, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
100%. So I gave a very brief introduction, and we have really just connected in the last couple weeks. Yeah. So for folks that are watching and listening at home, do you mind just sharing a little bit more about each of yourselves?
Yeah, I can go first.
Sure.
My name is Ellen Fitzgerald. I have lived in Indianapolis since 2013. I was born and raised in Valparaiso. Lived a couple of different places between high school, college, following college, et cetera. But moved back here in 2013 to start grad school and have been here ever since. My career is mostly centered on higher education and corporate management consulting. So that's what I do in my full-time life. But I'm also a former ballet dancer. So that's a fun fact about me.
All right.
And I got connected to Chelsea through kind of strange series of events. And I'll have her do her introduction, and then we can talk a little bit about how this all came to be.
Perfect.
All right. I'm Chelsea McDonough, and I have lived in Indianapolis since 2008. I grew up in northern Indiana and then went to Bloomington for college and then ended up here. We live in the suburbs. Ellen is more inside the circle. So we have both perspectives.
Love it.
Yes. And I have been a blogger for 15 years, full-time for over 10 years. So that's kind of my background, is in blogging, social media.
Okay, I love it. And I love, again, the multiple perspectives from the city. It works and it makes it work because we are encompassing more than just one area. So y'all launched in October, I believe, of last year. So again, how did we come together? What were the series of events that led to the formation?
Well, I wanted to start it because there have been a lot of these moms for groups coming up from different states. So there's moms for Ohio, moms for Iowa, those types of social media accounts. And I secured the account. And then I connected with Ellen through Brittany from Moms for Oregon. And she was kind of the push to get everything rolling. So yeah, we connected and kind of pieced it all together, really.
Yeah. We launched on October 1st, which I believe was the night of the vice presidential debate. So we were deep in the presidential election campaign season when we launched. So a lot of the work that we were doing initially was around voter registration, deadlines, and get out the vote efforts, and then campaigning for local candidates and statewide candidates.
Okay, I like it. So you had already locked the handle down. Yeah. Smart move. I'm wondering, was there a moment specifically that led y'all to think, okay, so the vice presidential debate, October 1st, knowing okay, this is when we want to go public with the work that we're doing? Was it always the plan to go public, or was it just I'm going to hang on to this and see what happens and do the work that I'm already doing?
I think we had been talking for a couple of months about what this could look like and what our focus areas would be. And so we started to do some work probably late in the summer and in September. And as we just sort of were gathering information and trying to understand kind of the landscape and also doing some research on the other women who were leading these accounts in other states and trying to figure out what are their focus areas, because we know we can't focus on everything.
Sure.
Every issue is important, but every issue can't be tackled in a deep way. And so I think it was really just, we kind of got our acts together, and the October 1st was the vice presidential debate. So it just seemed like a natural place to launch.
Yeah. But something we talk a lot about in the show is like finding the lane, and then knowing that if you pour into your lane, like the best part about community is that there are people focusing on these other things that are experts in these other areas that can handle it. And it's like, that's how we build a strong coalition, a connective, cohesive, forward moving community. One of the things that I want to talk about before we jump into kind of our pressing legislative issues is I really appreciate, so I've been following your account, I think for 3 weeks, maybe 6. I don't remember exactly when I came across it, but what I really appreciated was just like I said in the intro, the way you make information accessible. Like there's so much information happening. And like we're hearing people, especially chatter on social media, talk about the onslaught of information, the push to exhaust people. And I feel like y'all take the time, or have taken the time, to slow it down in your specific lanes. Public education, I know, is one of them. A big one, voting rights, local elections. I think the thing that really resonated with me was this utilization of your privilege to step in and talk about this. Because something that I've been talking to my wife a lot about is how for some folks, like if information was presented by a Black woman, it probably would not be received in the same way, or it would not reach the same amount of people. And I think what we need now is folks to utilize their privilege to step in for communities that have been marginalized in that way. So like I'm Asian, so I have a marginalized community that I come from, but I'm also a straight male. So like it's important for me to step into spaces where folks from the LGBTQ plus community may not be heard or amplified in that way. And so I wanted to ask, what does it look like to strategically utilize your privilege in that way? And have you, has that changed the way that you navigate your own individual spaces in kind of the short time that you've been doing this work as Moms for Indiana?
It's a really good question. I think for me, I've always been interested in dynamics of power, privilege, and oppression. I went to grad school for higher education. We talked about student identity development as a subject matter. And so I did a lot of this work professionally in the DEI space, which is a whole nother thing that we probably don't need to get into in terms of the attack on that kind of work over the last several weeks. And so it's always been something that I just have done, right? Yeah. I have part of my background professionally was working with sororities and fraternities, primarily those that are historically white. And so working with, young college students who come from privileged backgrounds to help them lead and learn, and also be able to expand their spheres of influence so that they can have chapters that look more diverse. And so I think for me, that's just always been something that I just did. And I also think, and I can have Chelsea speak to this too, but I also think that there's an online group of moms, mostly white moms, right, that aren't reached by traditional political communication. Sure. And I think that's part of what the MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again movement, really captured in the zeitgeist was these mostly white, probably wealthy women, moms, who hadn't really been engaged in politics before. And we're trying to sort of do that on the progressive side of things.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that there aren't as many people like us that look like, like white women talking about progressive things and reaching other white women. They're kind of being inundated from, like the trad wife Maha side. And so if you're not seeing it, then, so that's why we're trying to get out there with that to counteract that in a sense.
I appreciate what you share about like certain groups might not have access to information or might not be receiving information. I was adopted. I grew up in a small rural town north of here, hour and a half north of here, where where what I learned was wholly rooted in conservative like values and tradition. And like that was even politics. Like we always make the joke, like the symbol for the Democratic Party was the donkey. So if you were a Democrat, you were an ass. Like that was the kind of the thing that we were talking about growing up. So like that was the information I was receiving. It wasn't until like a lot of people, you go to college, you kind of get exposed to some stuff and you start to hopefully think a little bit more critically about the world. Was there a moment that you realized in your own spheres where you were like, or maybe in like suburban Indianapolis, like a moment that was like, okay, there's information that's just not broaching this area?
I think a lot of this started, a lot of the accounts that we would say are kind of the models for what we're trying to do in Indiana, started a couple of years ago with a heavy focus on school board elections.
Okay.
There was a
Moms for Liberty
movement called Moms for Liberty,
which is where the state accountants got the Moms for Indiana instead of Moms for Liberty. Yeah.
All right, that makes sense.
Yes.
Because
I assume there was some sort of correlation that, and maybe it was a repudiation, but
yeah. And so there was this, I think, push among this very powerful group of people who were funded by PACs and other, conservative donors to make school board elections more partisan and more divisive, and with the intent of things like, altering the curriculum to suit the whims of conservative values.
Sure.
Quote unquote.
Yes. And COVID also really spurred people because they were very against the mask mandates in schools and that sort of thing. So it kind of, there was a huge surge.
Well, I felt like I remember a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, Moms for Liberty was pretty active in Hamilton County, I think, or there was a group there.
Where?
Because I think that they quoted Hitler at some point in a newsletter. And that
they did.
That did happen.
Which has now happened in other Moms for Liberty groups in other places I've just recently seen. So, yeah. I have, so many questions, but we got a lot going on. So to set the stage, we are recording this on February 20th? 19th. I'm hoping that this is February 24th when you're watching this. Tomorrow, the 20th, is, I believe, the deadline for bills to pass out of their committee of origin. Is that
their chamber of origin?
Chamber of origin. And that is kind of the timeline that we find ourselves in, about 7 weeks out from the end of the legislative session here in the state. So one of the reasons we're having this conversation is because, again, they've been breaking down everything that's been happening from a legislative standpoint, and that's what we want to tackle right now is there's a lot of bills coming out, a lot of legislation happening, and we're trying to figure out kind of as we move into this final phase of our legislative session, what are the things that are most pressing at the moment that we need to be paying attention to? And I've realized that's a very broad question. So I feel like, y'all are tapped in. So I want to know from your perspective, like these are the things.
Do you mind if I pull up my notes? Because the bills have
Yeah,
numbers.
I think the first one was SB1 that we talked about.
Yes.
Because they're wanting to cut property taxes, which Indiana is already one of the lowest property tax states in the country. And the first time they rolled it out, it was not good at all. And they had a lot of pushback from the local counties,
Hamilton
towns.
Southeastern School District, which is, in Hamilton County, primarily Fishers, was estimated to, with the original bill, lose $82 million over the course of 3 years with the property tax cut.
Okay.
which is a lot.
That is a lot.
A lot. And then they've since scaled it back some. So schools will still lose money. But then
it's $60 million is the new estimate.
Yeah. So the Republicans will look like it's a big win that they lowered property taxes, but schools will then most likely have to pass referendums to make up for the lost money. So then it'll look bad on the school's part because they're the one asking for the money, but it's because the state, scaled that back. So it'll get made up just in a different way.
Sure.
The money will, because you need the money to fund the schools and to fund the fire departments and police departments and things like that. So,
and the other thing about SB1 is that the Senate Democrats put forth a handful of amendments, and one of them would be to focus on that property tax cut on renters as well. Because I don't have the exact statistic on me, but something like a third of Indiana residents are renters. And they also pay property taxes just in the form of it's passed on from their landlord or their management company. Well, that property tax relief would not be passed on to renters.
No.
And so there was an effort to try to add that property tax relief into the bill, and I believe that it failed. So,
did any amendments that they put forth end up going through? I don't think that I saw any, but I wanted to ask.
I think just the amendment to scale everything back, just because of the pushback
they sort of rewrote
received.
the bill, which we did read an article yesterday that the governor is unhappy about the state of the bill.
Because it won't be as big of a win for him.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, and it seems very interesting. So this is and maybe this is like a micro example of a larger issue within the movement currently happening in this administration, where the policy or what is being put forth doesn't necessarily match up with the promises made for helping people, that they're in their base or whatever the case might be. And it's a lot of very contradictory things happening, specifically with legislation that's going to negatively impact the people that have now put these people in the position to have these conversations. What is what is the biggest misconception about SB1 that folks need to realize that is maybe being actually weaponized to keep people in the dark about why they shouldn't be for or they should not support this particular legislation? So
one of our kind of Instagram, social media kind of community members is a woman named Corinne Strait. She has sort of blown up on TikTok recently. And she was talking the other day about what are called regressive taxes. Property taxes are a regressive tax. So everyone is taxed at the same rate. No matter what your income is, your property taxes obviously rise with how much your house costs, but the rate is the same, regardless if you make $40,000 a year or $250,000 a year. And so the percentage that someone is paying for their property tax is the same, but it is a much larger percentage if you are poorer than if you are wealthy. And so there are lots of ways to provide relief to Indiana residents, but this focus on the regressive tax at which everyone is taxed at the same level it's going to help wealthy people more than it will help those who are in lower income brackets.
I think I just literally watched that reel or on the way here because it's
a great explainer.
Yeah. So something like for the top 5% of earners or whoever or income earners, it's like your tax break will go up, your percentage goes up. In terms of what you don't have to pay. I don't know if I'm explaining this right.
Yeah, it was 1 point something percent of their income is going towards property taxes. And then the lower, is it?
It's 10 something.
Yeah,
so
it's
it went
lot,
up from the 6 or 8 number, I think. Yeah, but it's a sharper rise than what you see from even, the other side.
Yeah. So a lot of it's just the optics of like them saying like, oh, we're going to lower your property taxes. Well, but you're still paying a larger percentage of your income than people who have more money. So it's a lot of just the optics of it.
And the sort of secondary piece, and, you know, we focus a lot on our account and in our communications around public education. Public education is funded by property tax dollars.
Sure.
So if you cut property taxes, you are essentially giving the school district less money to educate your children. And when they have budgetary shortfalls, they have two options. They can cut services, staff, etc., or they can put up a property tax referendum locally, and it either has to pass or not to make up that budgetary shortfall. And so ultimately, property tax cuts hurt individual school districts. And the reason why the bill is so scaled back is because the cities in which you do pay a property tax premium to live there, Carmel, Westfield, Zionsville, Fishers, we're going to see the biggest cuts to their public school budget. And if you want people to live in, people move to these places to attend these good public schools. And the state was essentially hamstringing those individual municipalities from funding their individual schools.
Okay. So I'm trying to connect some dots. First off, thank you for educating. So we recently, and I don't want to talk about stuff that we really don't have to necessarily worry about right now, but we recently saw a bill fizzle out that would have pushed to dissolve IPS and for charter schools. And I think one of the big talking points for the pro-charter school community is property taxes. So I think it's really interesting to hear that they want to push property tax cuts for public schools, which I guess will put money back into the hands of wealthier people, like we've talked about. And those same folks that want those property tax cuts seem to be the ones that also want the charter schools to go through. So I'm trying to connect the dots, but I'm also like, okay, something's not lining up. And I don't know if y'all have perspective on what's not lining up there, or if you're like, that's a deeper conversation and we should maybe go to the next piece of legislation that we should talk about.
So House Bill 1334 is the bill that you were talking about that would have essentially dissolved IPS.
Right.
There is another bill that we were going to mention, which is SB 518, which is going to be voted on either today or tomorrow in the Senate, that would require IPS to share their property tax revenue with charter schools. Now, this gets a little bit complicated, so I'm going to do my best to explain.
Awesome.
But there are three types of schools essentially in Indiana. There are public schools that are funded by public money through property tax dollars, etc. There are charter schools that are funded by state money. And there are private and religious schools that are funded by school voucher programs, which is framed on the conservative side as school choice. And so the SB 518 doesn't have anything to do with vouchers, but it is sort of in the same school choice realm. Because it would force IPS, which is already constrained in their budgets because there are many areas of the city that don't have high property taxes, right? And when the way that you fund a school is by paying property taxes. And so if you don't, generate that money, then you often have to put up referendums. And there have been several over the last few years with IPS to try to raise money to make sure that they don't have budgetary shortfalls. This SB 518 bill would force IPS to share half of their property tax revenue with charter schools that are in the district. Now, charter schools are free to attend, but they are largely unregulated and they are run by a very powerful lobby. And they are run by unelected boards. They're not part of the district or under the purview of the district's board. So the state is essentially saying, we don't want to fund these charter schools any longer, even though we passed a bill in 2001 to establish charter schools in our state. And so now we would like to force the districts that have charter schools to split their property tax revenue with those charter schools, despite the fact that those charter schools don't have the same kind of oversight that, say, an Indianapolis Public Schools has.
This is one of the reasons I really appreciate the work that y'all do, because I think even there, like, there is so much that you had to unpack to just provide that explanation. And I think that's part of the political game that's being played, is to make it so complicated and to make it seem almost like it doesn't make sense. So the thing that's like I was thinking about while you were sharing was just like, okay, so, well, first off, school vouchers, like, don't taxpayers fund the voucher program?
We do.
Okay, so we're already paying for that. But like, when you talked about hamstringing counties with the property taxes and with scaling that back, it seems like what's really actually happening is that it's a leverage play to just take it from IPS.
I think that's right.
They're not even, I wouldn't even say the other counties are being held hostage necessarily. It's more so like, I don't know. Is that, you said right, but I'm like, is that like, are the dots coming together in that way? Like, is that what's really what we're seeing here?
I think it's complicated, and I don't want to make it. I don't want to make it too complicated.
For sure.
I can have Chelsea talk about the school vouchers and why they're so problematic. But the state, run by conservatives, run by Republicans there's been a Republican supermajority since 2010. And there's been a Republican trifecta, given that they hold the governorship and both chambers of the legislature since 2011. And over that time, the legislature and the previous governors have demonstrated through their actions that they don't really appreciate public schools and they want to privatize them. And the efforts with SB 518, which don't deal with private schools, but do deal with charters with unelected school boards, is one piece of that pie. That attack on public education and an effort to divert public money away from public ed and toward these other avenues of educating children.
Okay, so SB 1, SB 518, very important. And very important for us to like cut through. And again, I appreciate you sitting down and explaining this, and like us now being able to just, again, share already what you've been doing, but sharing now clips of this to be able to disseminate this information, to cut through some of, excuse my language, the bullshit, and speak plainly about kind of what's happening. So that way we are operating off of fact and not conjecture or opinion. I feel like there's a few other bills that I want to touch on, but I want to ask Chelsea, as somebody who's been blogging and writing and communicating to a wide audience of people for 15 years now, how do you, like, Ellen has been breaking these things down. How do we go about like relaying these messages in that way that cuts through and reaches the widest audience of people and the people that need it the most in the way that you're doing with Moms for Indiana? Like, how do we tap into like that communication skill in order to get that information across?
I think trying to be as concise as possible. Like Ellen and I will go back and forth. She'll send me something and be like, this is like as short as I could make it in terms of like doing a video, because I think sometimes people get overwhelmed. And so you want to do it as concise as possible. Like when we were explaining the voucher school choice program, we did like carousels where we would do like a little fact on each thing, like how much money is being taken from our public schools to be for people making upwards of $200,000 a year families, they can get a voucher, and now they want to make it so it's universal. So anyone earning any income can get public money to put towards their child's private education. And so I think it's just putting it in terms of how it will affect them and their lives, and doing it from that angle and trying to just make it as concise as possible so they don't get overwhelmed, and to kind of feed into people's, emotion, because unfortunately rage is what is what sells. So I think, who wouldn't be upset about, 600 million taxpayer dollars going towards private and religious schools.
That was that was just last year.
That was in 1 year.
Great.
Yes. Yes. And I feel like most people would argue, like, my taxpayer dollars should not be going towards a private school. Like if someone wants to send their kid to a private school, that's more power to you. You can use your own money to do that. Like, why are you taking public funds to do that? So,
and just one caveat on that is, interestingly, the Indy Star did a piece last year, really expose on where the public tax dollars were going and what the financial implications of the voucher program were, and found that the average student now who is using the voucher program is a white female who comes from a family making $99,000 a year.
And who has never attended public school. Has just always been private.
Has never attended public school.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's the average user of the voucher program.
So I'm going to draw a correlation that probably may not be real, but I think you mentioned DEI earlier and the attack on DEI. And I think a big misunderstanding of DEI is like the biggest beneficiaries of DEI have been historically white women. And now looking at the voucher program, it sounds like that historically has been now the profile of the most benefited from the said program. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. One other follow-up to just like the communication of it. I love that you're talking about just like making it concise. Again, thinking about how a lot of the legislation and a lot of just the rhetoric around it is couched in so much extra. How do you strip away to know like this is the fact or this is the piece of information that we need to share?
Do you want to think that?
You can do it.
Part of the reason why people, especially in Indiana, we have a very disengaged electorate.
Yes.
Part of the reason why that is the case is because the process and the system is designed to be opaque. Everything is moving so fast. They don't get schedules for the Senate hearings up until the night before. Well, if you want to testify in committee against or for a bill, then you've got to figure out, if you're a mom like us, if you're a working mom like us, you got to figure out childcare. Yeah. You got to figure out if I can take off work. Depending on the bill, there may be 20 people testifying and you may go last, and you may have been sitting in this room for 4 hours. And if you don't have access to childcare or ability to take time off of work, then you can't participate. And so our focus has been helping to break down the process. We did a whole carousel of what the legislative process and the legislative session would look like, and what are the deadlines, and what's a committee hearing, and what's the second reading, and what's the third reading. because people don't know and because it is incredibly difficult to find that information online.
Like even for us, like we'll be like, can you find this? And it's hard. They make it hard for a reason.
You have to do all the, we do a lot of legwork in terms of Googling, and we have several, news organizations that we follow quite closely. But again, the average person and the average mom, the primarily white women that have children that we're talking to don't have time to do that. And so our job, as we see it, or me specifically, I don't want to speak for Chelsea, is breaking down what is happening and helping people focus on one thing a day that they can do outside of, during their kid's nap or, when they have a 5-minute break from work calls, right? Yeah. Because we know that not everyone can, come to the State House. I think part of the problem with the session too is that it is here in Indianapolis, and there are folks that we're trying to reach statewide, and people would have to drive 2 hours if they wanted to testify. Right. So our job is to kind of help people understand where they can focus and who they can call, and take 5 minutes to call their, senator.
Yeah. I feel like you just said it, like you're talking like specifically to moms who don't generally have the time. As my wife and I were new parents, where our son just turned 1, and that's the thing that we know.
Happy
is like we
birthday.
don't have time. Thank you.
My son just turned 2.
Oh, exciting. Yeah, just like no time. There is no time to do stuff. And I think for y'all to take the time to look up all of this stuff and then break it down in that way, that's got to be a lot. Like you said, it's hard to even find the stuff. So you have to dedicate an X amount of time to go ahead and do that. And then not only find it, read through it all, and then extrapolate the stuff that you know or feel is going to resonate the most with the people that you're trying to reach.
And unpaid.
And unpaid. That's a conversation that we love to have on the show, because we need to get our people paid who do important work in the community on the ground like this. Like, how do you all find the time to make sure that this is work that you stay engaged with?
I mean, basically it's become like a hobby at this, you know what I mean? Like some people, have their things, and this has kind of been ours, is just spending extra time doing it, staying up late or getting up early in Ellen's case, because she has a little one that gets her up. So yeah,
I haven't been able to get up after 6 in 2 years.
Oh my gosh, I could not.
I feel that after 1 year.
Yeah. So yeah, it's basically, I think it's just our drive to the passion behind it and wanting to get this information out and to get other, moms fired up about these things and educated so they know how it's affecting them and their kids and, their families and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to us, right? Like we're both, I would say we've both been politically engaged and active since long before the 2016 election.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is just something that it's in our DNA. It's not something that we've had to really, we've had to learn a lot in terms of how the legislature works and the groups that are engaged, down at the State House. But it's fun for us.
Yeah, and you're not new to this.
Right.
Not new to the game.
Yeah.
For sure.
We're new to communicating it in maybe this particular way, but even both of us have always really, for the last several years, posted about politics on our Instagram stories to our individual audiences. So that part's not new. It's the part that we're trying to get people to take some sort of action and break down things on maybe a more detailed level. That's slightly new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned that we have a pretty disengaged electorate, and that's one of the reasons that you're doing the work that you're doing. Has you found in the time that you've been doing it a tactic, a strategy that has worked to really engage folks and get them to do the call to action or whatever it might be? And you don't have to give away any of your secrets or anything, but just wondering if there's been something that you're like, oh, this really worked, and we want to press on that gas a little bit.
I'm trying to think of our viral stuff. What was our most viral one? The church. The church
No,
one?
the most viral reel that we posted was a clip of Attorney General Todd Rokita.
Oh, yeah, that was right. Yeah.
At his, at the governor's inauguration, talking about his vision for Indiana. And it was not a place that I want to live.
It was the opposite of welcoming, really.
Right.
So that was our most viral one.
And that's rage bait. And we try not to do that too often.
Yes.
But it is helpful, I think, for people to hear that, because if you are disengaged in politics, then you might not know that that is the vision that our Attorney General has for the state of Indiana. And there are lots of people that I don't think want that vision to come to life, but they're also busy and don't have the time and space to do the same kind of deep dives that we do. And so if we can help them understand what's at stake and make it real for them. Yeah.
SB1, SB 518. Give us a third piece of legislation that we really need paying attention to. I think those two are
now's where I have
important.
to pull up my notes. So there are 3 bills that sort of deal with elections, and they're I'm going to take some liberty with your question.
Let's do it.
So SB 287 and HB 1230 are companion bills. So one of them is in the Senate and one of them is in the House. And they would require, one of them has the option to make school board candidates declare a political party. Chelsea, do you want to talk about why that's problematic?
Because school corporations are supposed to be nonpartisan.
Right.
They are just strictly supposed to be for the students. And there shouldn't, and you will have people go in that will blindly just see an R and vote for that. And I feel like happens a lot in Indiana. They just go in and they just pick that and do
party
like
line.
Yes.
That's, again, growing up in a small town, that's what we were taught to do when you got old enough to vote. Just vote for your party.
Yes. And it could restrict some people. I keep doing this with my hand talker.
I'm also a hand talker. It's nice
keep
to have
your hands
these things.
together.
Props.
Yes. That's like an ongoing joke with my social media following, is that I always, like, my hands are just always going. So it could also restrict people. The Hatch Act, you cannot serve if you are a federal employee. So federal employees could not be on school boards. And also there's, the thinking that, someone might be overwhelmed by that, by having to choose a party and make them stay away because they want to be nonpartisan and just be for the kids. So that's one that we are very much against.
Yeah. And it's, school boards are not meant to be partisan. They just aren't. They don't deal with issues that are partisan, or they shouldn't.
Right.
And so requiring that is really detrimental to the potential pool of candidates that you could get, and also just, I think, bad in general for all of the reasons that you would imagine.
For sure.
And then there are 2 other voter suppression bills that we're watching quite closely. One of them is SB 201 that would close Indiana's primaries. So currently, Indiana has an open primary system, which is one of our favorite things about Indiana's election process. We don't have a lot to be proud of, but one of them is that we have open primaries, which means that you do not have to be a member of the Republican or Democratic Party to vote in a primary. You just show up on primary election day or with your absentee ballot, and you sign in, and they say, do you want a Republican or a Democratic ballot? And you take whichever one you want. So, my mom is somebody that is would identify herself as an independent, and she has voted in both primaries over many decades. And she likes being able to do that because she has not registered with any particular party. This would end that practice, and it would require someone who wants to vote in a primary to register as an R or a D, potentially a libertarian. I'm not sure. And
gotta get Donald Rainwater in there.
yeah.
He's there.
just always there. And not only would it require you to declare a political party, but it would require you to do that 119 days before the primary election. So primaries in Indiana typically happen in May. That would require you to declare a party in sometime like February, when most people are not thinking about voting. And we believe that this really shrinks the pool of voters and will deter independents and people who don't want to identify with a party from voting in primaries. In a state like Indiana, where we have a Republican majority, where typically Republicans are elected, the primary is the only opportunity to weed out extremist views and more right-wing candidates. And so if you restrict participation to people who identify with the party and who are registered with the party, then you are likely going to get more extreme candidates and not less. And that makes us very nervous.
Yep. I'm right there with you.
Do you want to talk about SB 284? That's the reducing.
Yeah, that's the one that reduces the early voting from 28 days to 14 days. So it'll just be more restrictive.
Sure.
The voting isn't that great in Indiana to begin with because it's just 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. on election day. Yeah. And then the early voting is nice because, you have all these days to choose from when you have the 28 days. So cutting it in half would just limit the voter turnout, really.
Yeah.
Because I know where we voted early in October and we waited for 45 minutes. And that was just early voting. Yeah. So there is good turnout with the early voting in Indiana. So I think limiting it would be, it would just be worse, but that's kind of what the Republicans want. So,
yeah.
Well, it goes hand in hand. Those two bills go hand in hand because the 119 days, I had heard about closing the primaries. I don't think that I had read that language at least. And I think that's a bit that sounds like the fine print that you don't know about because you, again, like you said, in February, you're probably not even realizing, I need to be checking this right now.
So if someone's an independent, right, and they don't know that this bill has passed and, they go to vote in 2026 in the primary and they show up and they're not registered with the party, they can't vote. Yeah. So it's disenfranchising.
Yeah.
And, it's the same thing with limiting the number of days in which you can vote early.
Right.
It's in our opinion, it's designed to disenfranchise people. It's not, that's a feature, not a bug.
Right.
But it's very worrisome and we really are concerned about it.
Well, I think definitely by design because, so again, I hate to reference the place that I grew up. Not that I hate the people there, but just like, anyways, just going back to it, it's like when we growing up there, it was, early voting was cool. Like you could do it, but it wasn't a big deal because there's 5,000 people there. So everybody can go and vote at the fire station or wherever it was. And it took maybe 30 minutes and you were done. Everybody in the town voted and it was all fine. That is, I think, a lot of people's perception of what it is and why something like 28 to 14, reducing of those early voting days might not seem that important because to them, it's not going to affect them in a major way. The registering for a closed primary might be more of something that will affect them directly. But at the end of the day, I think it's just, again, this, like what you're doing, this lack of information. And with elections, I feel like the deeper that we can get this information rooted, like the sooner we can root out some of, like you said, the extremists or, the extreme edges of things. We have, again, a few weeks left in session, and we now labeled a few different pieces of legislation that we need to be paying attention to. What do folks in the last 7 weeks or this last bit of cycle need to be doing, and how do they need to be going about doing it?
Following us. The biggest thing that we encourage people to do is to call the representatives.
Yeah.
So call their senator, call their representative. At the very least, email, submit an email, telling them how they would like them to vote. That way they are engaged in the process. Also, like attending, if they have like a town hall or something like that, go to those and have their opinions heard there. There was a big one in Lafayette recently with the governor that got a little rowdy, which, that's great.
We love rowdy.
Yeah, we love rowdiness.
Good trouble.
Yes, good trouble.
Love good trouble.
So yeah, it's just staying engaged because, it does end in April. So it's all packed up into this one time. So it's like, once you get to April, you can calm down a little bit because the Indiana session will be over. So.
And we have tried to strike a balance too between focusing on state issues and the state legislature and the session, and also what we feel like is important to discuss at the federal level.
Sure.
So Indiana has 2 Republican senators. One is more conservative than the other. And then we have, 9 districts. 2 of them are held by Democrats in the House. And what we have tried to do with our calls to action federally is be very specific about what the call to someone like Senator Young would be.
Sure.
To, not that it's necessarily been successful because he has voted for every cabinet secretary nomination that we asked him not to. But by calling, you are registering your dissatisfaction or your opinion with the office, and that does get passed on to the senator, regardless of whether or not he takes that into consideration when he goes to vote on the Senate floor. But we have tried to, strike a balance between covering the federal and covering the state, and we've focused more on state level issues because we know that focusing hyper-local is the most important thing.
Yeah. That's our today and tomorrow. Federal, maybe in the next couple of years. But the state stuff, the local stuff is where we need to know that. The federal stuff, we can learn about it, but we need to be in the know.
And there's so much coming out of the administration that it really is like drinking from a fire hose. Yeah. And so there's enough drinking from the fire hose at the State House. So we're just trying to focus in on the things that we feel like our audience would resonate with and connect to so that they don't feel overwhelmed, because feeling overwhelmed leads to hopelessness, and hopelessness leads to inaction. And we're trying to do the opposite.
I'm here for it. Talking about calling. So I live in Senator Hunley's district. I already know that she's aligned in the way that I would want her to vote. So for someone like me, what else do I need to be doing? Can I call other people? Can I just call everybody and say, hey, I live in the state of Indiana. Need you to go ahead and stop doing what you're doing? Like what is someone like myself in that position? What can we do?
Well, you could call if you're talking about like ways and means, that sort of thing, like if it's in committee, you could call them or one of the authors of the bill and just tell them that you are, a resident of Indiana and you disagree with it. There's that option.
Call the authors of a bill.
You can call the authors.
Okay. I like that.
Or you can call the chair of the committee as well. Obviously Senator Hunley is... We were at an event with her last week with Planned Parenthood at the State House, and I posted that this is a Senator Hunley stand account. So we love her. But it's still important for her to hear from constituents, regardless of whether or not, that she's going to vote the way that you want her to. But I think, calling the chairman of a committee when a bill is in committee, emailing the authors of the bill. You might also copy Senator Hunley on those emails. I know when you call, they really, they transcribe it and send it on as an email, and they will copy your senator there too.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it is more effective when people are emailing their own representative.
Right.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that you can't email or call other folks.
All right.
Yeah.
I hope we have like credits rolling, and it's just every legislator's phone number and email. Just
We do
scrolling through here.
we do have a new resource on our Instagram account. It's a spreadsheet that a friend of the account created with some colleagues of hers, and it has more specific email addresses and phone numbers for people like legislative assistants.
Yes.
So it's
Oh,
not just
okay.
Yes.
and names and what people are focused on. So that's in our link in bio if anybody is
okay.
interested.
Yes.
Those legislative assistants will be super happy to hear from all of us. So, I love it. Thank you for sharing the resource. And that just leads me, I have a couple more questions. And first
Of
off, I
course.
really appreciate y'all coming in here and giving us this time and educating us. You're talking about resources. I saw on your stories the other day, someone had asked, because of all the stuff that's going on right now and the amount of stuff that's happening and the pace that it's happening at, it's hard to prioritize. And you linked to a great resource, Adam Wren's Substack.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the spreadsheet now. What other resources or people should we be paying attention to or tapping in with now and in the future?
I know we mentioned her earlier, but Corinne Strait is doing some
yes.
great things. I think she's up in Elkhart, right? Is that what we said?
Mm-hmm.
And Mad Voters is another one, statewide. Oh, I'm trying to think more.
Emily in Your Phone is kind of the group of kind of moms for accounts calls her their godmother.
Yeah, she's like mother.
okay.
So
Because she does a lot of targeted, action-oriented calls at the federal level.
Okay.
And she used to work for the Senate. She was counsel for Chuck Schumer, and so she's very knowledgeable. She also has a Substack that breaks down a lot of issues, and she's also very tapped into one thing we were talking about earlier, which is this capture of the Maha moms.
Sure.
And she understands kind of the psychological game that is being played there, as well as the use of and manipulation of social media and the conservative media ecosystem to spread mis and disinformation. And she does a really good job of kind of breaking all of that down. And that's just a personal interest of mine, is how all of that happens and why. And so, but she does really excellent calls to action for the federal level too.
Nice.
Yeah. What else? Who else?
are we talking statewide or just in general? Howdy does a good job. Motherhood for Good. Sorry. Motherhood for Good. She's out of Wisconsin.
Howdy Politics is out of Texas.
Yes, that's Kat. They do great stuff. They do statewide stuff, but then also on a national level.
Awakening Through Parenthood is based out of Atlanta. She does, again, good Georgia work, but also at the federal level. So,
and then there's also Americans for Democracy.
Americans for Democracy.
Okay.
And that's in Florida.
Yeah.
So it's part of the whole like Moms for ecosystem. So there's quite a group. We follow Mrs. Frazzled, who is Ariel. She does great breakdowns about what's happening in education across the country. And she was the one who brought our attention to the Section 504 lawsuit that Indiana is currently involved in.
Oh yeah, we haven't even talked about that.
Yeah.
The biggest thing you can do there is call the Attorney General's office and ask him to withdraw Indiana from this suit. But
yeah, we have a post on that with like a phone number, because I know some people have been having issues with the phone number. So we have a good phone number on our Instagram for reaching his office.
And then there's a handful of other accounts statewide that are doing good work. Following the Indiana House Democrats and the Indiana Senate Democrats on social media, and following your individual representative and senator. If they don't have an Instagram account, tell them to get one.
Yes.
Because if they don't have one, there are several that don't, then they're missing out on the audience that is there, which is millennial moms mostly. TikTok skews younger, and Instagram skews our demographic. And so they're missing out on communicating with us, and we want more communication is better.
Yes. Shout out to Senator Hunley. Her weekly updates, I think they're awesome. I see federal legislators who are now doing daily stuff. I think, like you said, like more communication is great, and we need to hear from y'all directly in it what is going on. And tap into the social media. It's too late. We can't do anything about it. It's already here. But we
trying
can
to use our powers for
good.
good.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to link all of that in the show notes, everything that you shared. Speaking of Section 504 and talking about you mentioning groups from different areas and different states, like just because stuff's happening here doesn't mean it's not happening other places. And probably we might be utilizing models that are happening other places for how we're doing stuff here.
Yes.
It's all connected. And while we must be focused on our own backyard, it doesn't hurt to know what's at least going on in other parts of the country, if not the world.
There was speaking of that, there's a homelessness bill that is would criminalize homelessness essentially in Indiana. And the WFYI did a report that bill was essentially an export from a think tank in Texas.
Oh, yep. Okay,
so it's all connected.
All connected. Like the MCU. It is all connected. Again, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing so much. I wish I had more time.
We'll stay here all day if you want us to.
I wish. I don't have enough money to pay these two to continue staying here. But what I do appreciate is that you, again, just came in here and made information accessible, and that I'm walking out of here a lot more knowledgeable. 2 more questions.
Of course.
We have a recurring segment on the show called Give Them Their Flowers. And Cole, if you're watching, I apologize I did not do the segment with you. But we asked our guests to shout out or give flowers to anybody that they think right now needs it or deserves it. So I want to ask you both, is there anybody that you'd like to highlight? You just named a ton of groups, a ton of really incredible people doing stuff. Anybody in particular that you'd love to give flowers to at the moment?
I think we both say Senator Hunley. That's a given. I would probably say Emily in your phone, because she's what spurred a lot of this with the whole getting more women involved in politics, with the whole Moms for, like I said, movement, with all the states getting involved. So yeah, I would say her, because she's what spurred a lot of people to get into action and start raising their voices on social media. So. Yeah.
I would say, I'm going to go local. I would say Senator Yoder.
Okay. Yeah, love her too.
As if people don't know, she's newly the Senate Minority Leader. And we don't have to go into that whole story, but we are deeply appreciative of her ability to break down things for her audience on social media, but she's also given some really compelling and beautiful speeches on the Senate floor in opposition to some really damaging legislation that's out there. She's offered up amendments that have failed, but she has done so with passion and grace and really astute, I think, leadership skills. And I think we're real lucky to have her at the helm of the Senate Democrats.
Yes,
so.
I'm here for it. Strong women, shouting out strong women. And we wouldn't be doing anything without strong women in our lives. So thank you both. Shout out to Emily in your phone. Shout out to Senator Young or Yoder. Senator Yoder, not Senator Young. We're going to cut that part out. Shout out to Senator Hunley, and shout out to Madeline McKinnon, Frida's Flowers Indy, for all your floral needs. As we close it out here, I know you said follow the account, Moms for Indiana, on IG. How else do we follow you? How do we support you? How do we amplify y'all's voices and work going forward?
I am also individually at Ellen Bobellin on Instagram. And I have a Substack called Choreographed Chaos, where I talk about motherhood and politics and other things about just life in general. So that's kind of personally another side project of mine. Chelsea?
Me. I am at 221. It's all spelled out. And on Instagram. And then I also have a blog/website where I don't really do political stuff. So there. But yeah, my Instagram, I've mostly stayed political in stories, but I'm starting to branch out to feed more. So we'll see what happens with that. But it'll be like politics and flowers coming up here
We
soon.
love it.
So, which is great. I feel like you need a little break from it all. So
100%.
look
And
at something pretty.
If you have something that's separate, that's totally fine. Like, I think that's great. And that's what I feel like when I go home to my 1-year-old. I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to turn my brain off for 5 seconds. And then I look at my phone and everything goes terrible. So,
And I think the way that, you can support us is just to follow Moms for Indiana and amplify our account, share our content, talk about our content with other people in your life, because this is not meant to stay online.
Sure.
It's meant to come offline. And we have some things that we're thinking about in terms of in-person meetups in the spring. And so we might take some of this offline.
Okay.
So that's really our goal, is to build
community building.
Yeah.
This is a year of community on the show here, so I'm here for that.
Great.
Any way that we can support, or at least I can support, would love to do it. Ellen, Chelsea, thank you so much for coming here to the show, for breaking it down for us, and for standing in the gap and doing this work that people may not be able to, but people desperately need. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
100%. Everybody else, new episodes every Tuesday, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. This is, again, the Emergency Conversation Series. Our first one with Cole Varga is out. Go check that out. This is coming out. We got at least 2 more coming. Lots of stuff happening in the world. Lots of stuff happening in Naptown. Got to stay abridged. Got to stay in the know. And we're going to continue to do that. But until then, John Overton and Popular Rapture on the mic. Mike Lee production on the cameras. We're in the Stutz building. Shout out to Pattern and the team over there. Chelsea McDonough, Ellen Fitzgerald, Moms for Indiana here. My guests, Madeline McKinnon, Frida's Flowers. I've been Patrick Armstrong, and this has been Conversation Piece. See y'all soon.